Section 1 of Castles in the Air. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Castles in the Air by Baroness Emmuska Orczy. Chapter 1. Roland for his Oliver. Part 1. My name is Ratichon, Hector Ratichon, at your service, and I make so bold as to say that not even my worst enemy would think of minimizing the value of my services to the state. For 20 years now I have placed my powers at the disposal of my country. I have served the Republic, and was confidential agent to citizen Robespierre. I have served the Empire, and was secret factotum to our great Napoleon. I have served King Louis, with a brief interval of 100 days, for the past 2 years, and I can only repeat that no one in the whole of France has been so useful or so zealous in tracing criminals, nosing out conspiracies, or denouncing traitors as I have been. And yet you see me a poor man to this day. There has been a persistently malignant fate which has worked against me all these years, and would but for a happy circumstance, of which I hope anon to tell you, have left me just as I was in the matter of fortune when I first came to Paris and set up in business as a volunteer police agent at number 96 Rue Donneau. My apartment in those days consisted of an antechamber, an outer office, where, if need be, a dozen clients might sit, waiting their turn to place their troubles, difficulties, anxieties before the acutest brain in France, and an inner room, wherein that same acute brain, mine, my dear sir, was wont to ponder and scheme. That apartment was not luxuriously furnished, furniture being very dear in those days, but there were a couple of chairs and a table in the outer office, and a cupboard wherein I kept the frugal repast which served me during the course of a long and laborious day. In the inner office there were more chairs, and another table, littered with papers, letters, and packets, all tied up with pink tape, which cost 3 sous the metre, and bundles of letters from hundreds of clients, from the highest and the lowest in the land. You understand, people who wrote to me and confided in me to-day as kings and emperors had done in the past. In the antechamber there was a chair bedstead for Theodore to sleep on when I required him to remain in town, and a chair on which he could sit. And, of course, there was Theodore. Ah, my dear sir, of him I can hardly speak without feeling choked with the magnitude of my emotion. A noble indignation makes me dumb. Theodore, sir, has ever been the cruel thorn that times out of number hath wounded my over-sensitive heart. Think of it! I had picked him out of the gutter. No, no, I don't mean this figuratively. I mean that, actually and in the flesh, I took him up by the collar of the tattered coat and dragged him out of the gutter in the Rue Blanche, where he was grubbing for trifles out of the slime and mud. He was frozen, sir, and starved. Yes, starved. In the intervals of picking filth up out of the mud, he held out a hand blue with cold to the passers-by, and occasionally picked up a sou. When I found him in that pitiable condition, he had exactly 20 centimes between him and absolute starvation. And I, Sir Hector Ratichon, the confidant of 2 kings, 3 autocrats, and an emperor, took that man to my bosom, fed him, clothed him, housed him, gave him the post of secretary in my intricate, delicate, immensely important business. And I did this, sir, at a salary which, in comparison with his 20 centimes, must have seemed a princely one to him. His duties were light. He was under no obligation to serve me or to be at his post before 7 o'clock in the morning, and all that he had to do then was to sweep out the 3 rooms, fetch water from the well in the courtyard below, light the fire in the iron stove which stood in my inner office, shell the haricots for his own mess of pottage, and put them to boil. During the day his duties were lighter still. He had to run errands for me, open the door to prospective clients, show them into the outer office, explain to them that his master was engaged on affairs relating to the Kingdom of France, and generally prove himself efficient, useful, and loyal; all of which qualities he assured me, my dear sir, he possessed to the fullest degree. And I believed him, sir. I nurtured the scorpion in my oversensitive bosom. I promised him 10% on all the profits of my business, and all the remnants from my own humble repasts: bread, the skins of luscious sausages, the bones from savoury cutlets, and the gravy from the tasty carrots and onions. You would have thought that his gratitude would become boundless, that he would almost worship the benefactor who had poured at his feet the full cornucopia of comfort and luxury. Not so. That man, sir, was a snake in the grass, a serpent, a crocodile. Even now that I have entirely severed my connection with that ingrate, I seem to feel the wounds like dagger thrusts which he dealt me with so callous a hand. But I have done with him, done, I tell you. How could I do otherwise than to send him back to the gutter from whence I should never have dragged him? My goodness, he repaid with an ingratitude so black that you, sir, when you hear the full story of his treachery, will exclaim aghast. Ah, you shall judge. His perfidy commenced less than a week after I had given him my third best pantaloons and 3 sous to get his hair cut, thus making a man of him. And yet, you would scarcely believe it, in the matter of the secret documents he behaved toward me like a veritable Judas. Listen, my dear sir. I told you, I believe, that I had my office in the Rue Donneau. You understand that I had to receive my clients, many of whom were of exalted rank, in a fashionable quarter of Paris. But I actually lodged in Passy, being fond of country pursuits and addicted to fresh air, in a humble hostelry under the sign of the Grey Cat, and there, too, Theodore had a bed. He would walk to the office a couple of hours before I myself started on the way, and I was wont to arrive as soon after 10 o'clock of a morning as I could do conveniently. On this memorable occasion of which I am about to tell you, it was during the autumn of 1815, I had come to the office unusually early, and had just hung my hat and coat in the outer room, and taken my seat at my desk in the inner office, there to collect my thoughts in preparation for the grave events which the day might bring forth, when suddenly an ill-dressed, dour-looking individual entered the room with so much as saying "By your leave," and after having pushed Theodore, who stood by like a lout, most unceremoniously to one side. Before I had time to recover from my surprise at this unseemly intrusion, the uncouth individual thrust Theodore roughly out of the room, slammed the door in his face, and having satisfied himself that he was alone with me, and that the door was too solid to allow of successful eavesdropping, he dragged the best chair forward, the one, sir, which I reserve for lady visitors. He threw his leg across it, and sitting astride, he leaned his elbows over the back, and glowered at me as if he meant to frighten me. "My name is Charles Soré," he said abruptly, "and I want your assistance in a matter which requires discretion, ingenuity, and alertness. Can I have it?" I was about to make a dignified reply when he literally threw the next words at me. "Name your price and I will pay it," he said. What could I do save to raise my shoulders in token that the matter of money was one of supreme indifference to me, and my eyebrows in a manner of doubt that Monsieur Charles Soré had the means wherewith to repay my valuable services? By way of a rejoinder he took out from the inner pocket of his coat a greasy letter case, and with his exceedingly grimy fingers extracted therefrom some 20 bank notes, which a hasty glance on my part revealed as representing a couple of 100 francs. "I will give you this as a retaining fee," he said, "if you will undertake the work I want you to do, and I will double the amount when you have carried the work out successfully." 400 francs. It was not lavish. It was perhaps not altogether the price I would have named, but it was very good these hard times. You understand, we were all very poor in France in that year 1815 of which I speak. I am always quite straightforward when I am dealing with a client who means business. I pushed aside the litter of papers in front of me, leaned my elbows upon my desk, rested my chin in my hands, and said briefly, "Monsieur Charles Soré, I listen." He drew his chair a little closer and dropped his voice almost to a whisper. "You know the Chancellerie of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?" he asked. "Perfectly," I replied. "You know Monsieur de Marsan's private office? He is chief secretary to Monsieur de Talleyrand." "No," I said, "but I can find out." "It is on the first floor, immediately facing the service staircase, and at the end of the long passage which leads to the main staircase." "Easy to find, then," I remarked. "Quite. At this hour and until 12 o'clock Monsieur de Marsan will be occupied in copying a document which I desire to possess. At 11 o'clock precisely there will be a noisy disturbance in the corridor which leads to the main staircase. Monsieur de Marsan in all probability will come out of his room to see what the disturbance is about. Will you undertake to be ready at that precise moment to make a dash from the service staircase into the room to seize the document, which no doubt will be lying on the top of the desk, and bring it to an address which I am about to give you?" "It is risky," I mused. "Very," he retorted dryly. "Or I do it myself and not pay you 400 francs for your trouble." "Trouble!" I exclaimed with a withering sarcasm. "Trouble, you call it? If I am caught it means penal servitude, New Caledonia perhaps." "Exactly," he said, with the same irritating calmness. "And if you succeed it means 400 francs. Take it or leave it as you please, but be quick about it. I have no time to waste. It is past 9 o'clock already, and if you won't do the work, someone else will." For a few seconds longer I hesitated. Schemes both varied and wild rushed through my active brain. Refuse to take this risk, and denounce the plot to the police; refuse it, and run to warn Monsieur de Marsan; refuse it, and— I had little time for reflection. My uncouth client was standing, as it were, with a pistol to my throat, with a pistol and 400 francs. The police might perhaps give me half a louis for my pains, or they might possibly remember an unpleasant little incident in connection with the forgery of some treasury bonds which they have never succeeded in bringing home to me. One never knows. Monsieur de Marsan might throw me a franc, and think himself generous at that. All things considered, then, when M. Charles Saurez suddenly said, "Well?" with marked impatience, I replied, "Agreed," and within 5 minutes I had 200 francs in my pocket, with the prospect of 200 more during the next 24 hours. I was to have a free hand in conducting my own share in the business, and M. Charles Saurez was to call for the document at my lodgings at Passy on the following morning at 9 o'clock. I flatter myself that I conducted the business with remarkable skill. At precisely 10 minutes to 11 I rang at the Chancellerie of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was dressed as a respectable commissionnaire, and I carried a letter and a small parcel addressed to M. de Marsan. "First floor," said the concierge curtly, as soon as he had glanced at the superscription on the letter. "Door faces top of the service stairs." I mounted and took my stand some 10 steps below the landing, keeping the door of M. de Marsan's room well in sight. Just as the bells of Notre Dame boomed the hour, I heard what sounded like a furious altercation somewhere in the corridor just above me. There was much shouting, then one or two cries of "Murder!" followed by others of "What is it? And what in the name of is all this infernal row about?" Doors were opened and banged. There was a general running and rushing along that corridor, and the next minute the door in front of me was opened also, and a young man came out, pen in hand, and shouting just like everybody else. "What the is all this infernal row about?" "Murder! Help!" came from the distant end of the corridor, and Monsieur de Marsan, undoubtedly it was he, did what any other young man under the like circumstances would have done. He ran to see what was happening, and to lend a hand in it, if need be. I saw his slim figure disappearing down the corridor at the very moment that I slipped into his room. One glance upon the desk sufficed. There lay the large official-looking document, with the royal signature affixed thereto, and close beside it the copy which Monsieur de Marsan had only half finished. The ink on it was still wet. Hesitation, sir, would have been fatal. I did not hesitate, not one instant. 3 seconds had scarcely elapsed before I picked up the document, together with Monsieur de Marsan's half-finished copy of the same, and a few loose sheets of Chancellerie paper which I thought might be useful. Then I slipped the lot inside my blouse. The bogus letter and parcel I left behind me, and within 2 minutes of my entry into the room I was descending the service staircase quite unconcernedly, and had gone past the concierge's lodge without being challenged. How thankful I was to breathe once more the pure air of heaven! I had spent an exceedingly agitated 5 minutes, and even now my anxiety was not altogether at rest. I dared not walk too fast, lest I attracted attention, and yet I wanted to put the river, the Pont Neuf, and half a dozen streets between me and the Chancellerie of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. No one who has not gone through such an exciting adventure as I have just recorded can conceive what were my feelings of relief and of satisfaction when I at last found myself quietly mounting the stairs which led to my office on the top floor of number 96 Rue Daunou. Now, I had not said anything to Theodore about this affair. It was certainly arranged between us, when he entered my service as confidential clerk and doorkeeper, that in lieu of wages, which I could not afford to pay him, he would share my meals with me, and have a bed at my expense, in the same house at Passy where I lodged. Moreover, I would always give him a fair percentage on the profits which I derived from my business. The arrangement suited him very well. I told you that I picked him out of the gutter, and I heard subsequently that he had gone through many an unpleasant skirmish with the police in his day, and if I did not employ him, no one else would. After all, he did earn a more or less honest living by serving me. But in this instance, since I had not even asked for his assistance, I felt that, considering the risks of New Caledonia and a convict ship which I had taken, a paltry 400 francs could not by any stretch of the imagination rank as a profit in a business, and Theodore was not really entitled to a percentage, was he? So when I returned I crossed the antechamber and walked past him with my accustomed dignity, nor did he offer any comment on my get-up. I often affected a disguise in those days, even when I was not engaged in business, and the dress and get-up of a respectable commissionnaire was a favourite one with me. As soon as I had changed I sent him out to make purchases for our luncheon, 5 sous worth of stale bread and 10 sous worth of liver sausage, of which he was inordinately fond. He would take the opportunity on the way of getting moderately drunk on as many glasses of absinthe as he could afford. I saw him go out of the outer door, and then I set to work to examine the precious document. Well, one glance was sufficient for me to realize its incalculable value. Nothing more or less than a treaty of alliance between King Louis XVIII of France and the King of Prussia in connection with certain schemes of naval construction. I did not understand the whole diplomatic verbiage, but it was pretty clear to my unsophisticated mind that this treaty had been entered into in secret by the two monarchs, and that it was intended to prejudice the interests of both Denmark and Russia in the Baltic Sea. I also realized that both the governments of Denmark and Russia would no doubt pay a very considerable sum for the merest glance at this document, and that my client of this morning was certainly a Secret Service agent, otherwise a spy, of one of those two countries, who did not choose to take the very severe risks which I had taken this morning, but who would, on the other hand, reap the full reward of the daring coup, whilst I was to be content with 400 francs. Now I am a man of deliberation as well as of action, and at this juncture, feeling that Theodore was still safely out of the way, I thought the whole matter over quietly, and then took what precautions I thought fit for the furthering of my own interests. To begin with, I set to work to make a copy of the treaty on my own account. I have brought the study of calligraphy to a magnificent degree of perfection, and the writing on the document was easy enough to imitate, as was also the signature of our gracious King Louis and of Monsieur de Talleyrand, who had countersigned it. If you remember, I had picked up 2 or 3 loose sheets of paper off Monsieur de Marsans' desk. These bore the arms of the Chancellerie of Foreign Affairs stamped upon them, and were in every way identical with that on which the original document had been drafted. When I had finished my work I flattered myself that not the greatest calligraphic expert could have detected the slightest difference between the original and the copy which I had made. The work took me a long time. When at last I folded up the papers and slipped them once more inside my blouse, it was close upon 2. I wondered why Theodore had not returned with our luncheon, but on going to the little anteroom which divides my office from the outer door, great was my astonishment to see him lolling there, on the rickety chair which he affectioned and half asleep. I had some difficulty in rousing him. Apparently he had got rather drunk while he was out, and had then returned and slept some of his booze off, without thinking that I might be hungry and needing my luncheon. "Why didn't you let me know you had come back?" I asked curtly, for indeed I was very cross with him. "I thought you were busy," he replied, with what I thought looked like a leer. I have never really cared for Theodore, you understand. However, I partook of our modest luncheon with him in perfect amity and brotherly love, but my mind was busy all the time. I began to wonder if Theodore suspected something. If so, I knew that I could not trust him. He would try and ferret things out, and then demand a share in my hard-earned emoluments to which he was really not entitled. I did not feel safe with that bulky packet of papers on me, and I felt that Theodore's bleary eyes were perpetually fixed upon the bulge in the left-hand side of my coat. At one moment he looked so strange that I thought he meant to knock me down. So my mind was quickly made up. After luncheon I would go down to my lodgings at Passy, and I knew of a snug little hiding place in my room there, where the precious documents would be quite safe until such time as I was to hand them, or one of them, to Monsieur Charles Sauret. This plan I put into execution, and with remarkable ingenuity too. While Theodore was busy clearing up the debris of our luncheon, I not only gave him the slip, but as I went out I took the precaution of locking the outer door after me, and taking the key away in my pocket. I thus made sure that Theodore could not follow me. I then walked to Passy, a matter of 2 kilometres, and by 4 o'clock I had the satisfaction of stowing the papers safely away under one of the tiles in the flooring of my room, and then pulling the strip of carpet in front of my bed snugly over the hiding place. Theodore's attic, where he slept, was at the top of the house, whilst my room was on the ground floor, and so I felt that I could now go back quite comfortably to my office in the hope that more remunerative work and more lavish clients would come my way before nightfall. End of chapter 1, part 1. Read by Lars Rolander.